Hi, and welcome to Crafts with Ash DIY and Decor. My name's Ashley, and today I am so excited to bring you 10 must-try spring DIYs for 2022. I actually created these DIYs last year, but my channel was still so small, not a lot of people saw them, so I thought that I would share them with you again this year. First, if you haven't done so already, please don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and hit that little notification bell so you're notified anytime I upload a new video. Also, click the drop-down menu and click all so you're notified about all notifications. I upload videos every Wednesday and Friday, and I have a ton of fun content planned and coming up, so you're definitely going to want to stay tuned. All right, like I said, these were all DIYs from last year, so if the commentary seems a little weird, just remember I recorded this in 2021. But let's jump into these 10 must-try spring DIYs. For my first dollar spot DIY, I picked up these vinyl stickers, and they're just like peel and stick vinyl letters from the Target dollar spot. And it is a 2-pack, so I'm going to be using both in this video. Then I'm also going to be using this box sign that I picked up from the Dollar Tree. So the first thing I did was just pry out that little hanger on the back, and then I tried to peel off all the paper on the front. Now the majority of it did come off, but it left like the bottom layer of the paper. You can see where the wood is underneath that. And then of course, they had to be stubborn up here at the top, so I just gave up. I tried to use my my heat gun to try to, pick it all off, but I gave up. So I just sanded it all down. That way it was nice and smooth for me to cover. Next, I took this gorgeous paper that I got from Hobby Lobby, and I traced my board on top of that and then just cut it out. Then by using Mod Podge, I adhered my paper to my board. I just put a nice thin coat all over the board, and especially paying attention to the side and the edges, and then laid my paper on top. Once it was dry, I took my sand sponge that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I sanded down the edges to make it a nice clean cut. Now some of the paper ripped, and I actually really loved that because it made it look more rustic, and if you've been following me for a while, you know I love rustic. So I just went ahead and kind of went for it, and I sanded down all the edges to make sure that the white underneath kind of came up, or the board underneath came up, and I just loved how the edges turned out. Next, I grabbed my pack of vinyl words from the Target dollar spot, and like I said, this one is a 2-pack. So one of them says bloom, and then the other one says hello spring. So I just went ahead and peeled the words off and kind of positioned them, but of course you don't want to push down completely because you're going to need to pick them up, to move them, make sure that they're centered. Now, if you have a Cricut, I've actually seen some people use transfer paper to do this, or the contact paper. I just don't have any. I don't have a Cricut, so I didn't, I couldn't do that method. But just picking them up and positioning them worked just fine with me. But that's just a little tip and a little hack that you can do. And then once I got my word on, I took the vine leaves and just kind of positioned them how I like them on the top and the bottom. Next, to make my words stand out just a little bit more, and of course to add that rustic look, I took my antique Waverly wax and a makeup sponge and just lightly brushed over the entire board. Then to make sure that all my letters stayed on, I went ahead and put a nice layer of Mod Podge right on top. Then I hit the sides with my makeup sponge and Waverly wax as well. And that completed this super cute, kind of shabby chic, I guess you would call it, but very rustic bloom sign for spring. What do you think? For this first DIY, I'm using this Welcome Summer sign that I got from the Dollar Tree. Now this sign is new this year, so if you see them, pick a bunch of them up because these are perfect to make big signs with. But for today, we're just going to use one of these. The first thing I did was take off this 3D foam welcome, and it was pretty easy to get off. I just started with my scraper and then it peeled right off. Next, I took off the twine hanger and the tag. Then I took my sanding block and sanded the back of the board down. That way it was nice and smooth for me to paint. Make sure to wipe it down when you're done sanding. The next thing I did was take my Waverly chalk paint in white and a chipping brush, and I went ahead and messily, I don't think that's a word, but I gave this a very messy paint job. So as you can see, I wasn't really going for full coverage here because I wanted to give this sign a chipped wood look. After my paint was dry, I took my Waverly Antique Wax and my favorite distressing brush from the Dollar Tree, and I dipped it in the lid, I dabbed it off on a plate, and then I dry brushed over my board with the wax. Now, again, I was not going for full coverage. I was just brushing, paying attention to the edges and the corners, and then also hitting the middle. Then I took the white chipping brush again and kind of brushed over the brown to tone it down. I kept going back and forth between the wax and the white chalk paint to create the look that I wanted. Next, I took this board that was the same length of the board that I'm working on, and I'm going to create the shiplap look. So I put the board down, and then I took a small paintbrush, dipped it into the Waverly Antique Wax, and then I just painted lines going down again to create the shiplap look. Then to blend everything in, I took my sanding block and I sanded it all down. After wiping it off, I took that little paintbrush again and I painted nail holes at the tops of every slat. So I put 2 nail holes in between every slat. And I did this on both ends of my board. Ahead and put my board off to the side to dry, and now I'm pulling these amazing chicken wire signs that I got from Dollar General for $1 each, and I'm going ahead and cutting off the wire hanger carefully, and then I'm going to take off the cowls in the middle of these signs. Now, I didn't have my needle nose pliers with me or like a little screwdriver to get in there, so I just used my scraper to kind of get the staples up, and then I used my wire cutters to pull them out. Now, you want to carefully do this so you don't accidentally rip off the chicken wire, but once I got underneath there and got the staples up, they were really easy to come out. Once those cowls came off, look at this amazing frame that you have left. I went ahead and did this on both. Next, I took 2 of these plastic jars that I got from the Dollar Tree for Valentine's Day. Now, I did see some for Easter too, so they should still have these. And I opened them out of the package and then I peeled the label off. I did this for both. Next, I took some twine and I wrapped it around the top of my jar. Then I wrapped it through the middle of my chicken wire and tied it to the back. I did this for both as well. I did go ahead and double knot it to make sure that it stayed, and then I just put some hot glue at the bottom wherever it was going to touch that chicken wire just to give it some extra support. Now when you do this, you do want to be careful because as you're about to see on this second one, I pulled it so tight through the chicken wire to tie it that the chicken wire actually came off. Now I did fix it, but I just wanted to let you know to kind of cautiously tie it. So there's where it came off. All I did was hot glue it back on there and it was fine. I haven't had a problem. But just be careful when you are tying the twine through the chicken wire. Before you tie that second one through there, you're going to want to put it next to the first one to make sure that both of your jars line up. After that, I cut off the remaining twine that was on the back, and then I went ahead and took my hot glue and kind of put some on the back to give it some more extra support. I did this on both as well. After my glue was dried, I took that whiteboard again and I lined both of these up on top. Now, I did have it more towards the bottom, so I left a little space on top. Once I positioned them where I like them, I went ahead and hot glued them down. Next, I took my twine and starting from the back, I hot glued it down and then I wrapped it around and around and around up top until I had the look I was going for. I finished it off by putting some hot glue on the back and then cutting off the remaining twine. Next, I took 2 of these sprays of greenery, and these came from the Dollar Tree and they are my absolute favorite. They look a little frosted and I think that's why I love it, and they had purples, pinks, yellows, so I grabbed a ton because like I said, they're my favorite. And I just went ahead and cut some little pieces off and then just arranged a little floral arrangement in each one of my jars. I tried to use all the pieces from both bushes to make it more full. So this next part, I'm going to give you a few options that you can do. So technically this is optional, but here's some ideas. What I did next was take these black chalkboard little signs that I got from the Dollar Tree and I took off the clothespin on the back. Then I went ahead and hot glued it to the front of each of those jars. Now before I did that, I decided that it needed a bow. So I just took my twine again and I cut a very simple bow and then hot glued it to the twine that was already on my jar. I did this for both. So back to my little chalkboards. I took my white paint marker and I wrote welcome on one of the signs and spring on the other. Now, the reason why I say this is optional is because if you don't do this, then you can actually use these jars to switch out the florals per season. So you can put some sunflowers in there for fall, and then maybe some pumpkin picks. You can throw some winter sprigs in there, some Christmas things, and then you can also change it up by using picks, like I said. So you could do hearts on a stick, you could do shamrocks on a stick, you could do eggs on a stick, something like that. So that's why I said that this next part is optional, but it's totally up to you. I absolutely loved how this came out. I think that I might end up taking those chalkboard tags off. That way I can switch it up. But what would you do? What do you think? For this next DIY, I grabbed 4 of these teacher boards from the Dollar General, and they were for Valentine's Day, and they were each $1. The first thing I did was use my scraper to unscrew the little hooks on the back, and I'm laughing because I did not have a screwdriver with me again, so I just used my scraper. It took a really long time, so just get a screwdriver. It'll save you so much work. Then, by using my hairdryer, I took off the stickers on the back. Now, I thought those little holes were going to be a problem, but they kind of disappeared after I sanded them down. So I went ahead and sanded down each of the boards because it still had a little residue from the sticker. Now watch what happens. Boom! I accidentally sanded the red and then went right on top of the white, and then that brought the sticker out in red. Oops. Oh well, it doesn't matter. I'm going to paint them anyways. After I sanded them down, I went ahead and wiped them off to make sure that there was no sand residue on there. Next, I took my Waverly chalk paint in white and I painted 2 of my boards with that. Now, ideally, I would have loved to get all white boards, but this is all they had, so I had to just use what they had. So I painted the 2 red ones in white, and then I'm going to create my own mixture to paint the other ones. But no matter what colors you get, if you do this project, you're just going to want 2 white and then 2 pale pink that you'll see in a second. I ended up doing 3 coats on each board. I made sure to paint every part of that board except for the very bottom. So I did the sides and the top. Next, I took my pink parfait paint from Apple Barrel and I mixed in a little bit of the Waverly chalk paint in white. Now, I had to create my own mixture because I didn't want it a bright pink, I wanted a pale pink. So if you have a pale pink color, then this would work. Or use whatever color you want. You can do a pale green, a pale blue, a pale yellow, whatever you love. And then I gave each of the white boards 3 coats of this little mixture. And again, I did the tops and all the sides. While I had my paint out, I took this package of little square blocks that I got from the Dollar Tree and painted 8 of them, although I only ended up using 4, so you're only going to need 4, in the Waverly chalk paint in white. Now, I figured out after doing the first one that you really only have to paint the sides of one, so where you're holding it with your thumb and your finger, you don't have to paint 2 of the sides. You just have to paint 4 squares going around, if that makes sense. After my boards were dry, I went ahead and lined them up pink, white, pink, white. Then, after I made sure that they were all lined up, I took this super glue that I got from the Dollar Tree that I've been seeing a lot of crafters use instead of E6000, so I decided to try it. And I did a super glue, hot glue combination, super glue for the permanent hold, hot glue for the immediate hold, and I did this on each of my boards to put them all together. Next, I went ahead and scraped off and cleaned off any of the glue that might have bled through. Now, if you know me, you know I can't just leave this pure white and pink like this, so I had to distress it. So I took that Waverly Antique Wax and a makeup sponge this time, and I dipped, dabbed, and then brushed my makeup sponge all over my boards to give it that antique and worn look. Then I turned the makeup sponge on the pointy side and I dipped it into the antique wax and traced down the lines of my boards to make it look like shiplap. Now, as you can see, I'm also rubbing it in with my finger. After I had it all painted and distressed how I liked it, I took my sanding block to it to blend all my colors in. I love the coloring on this. I just love how that came out. I did go over some of the spots with the Waverly Antique Wax and the chalk paint to get the look that I desired. Once I was done with all of that, I took this nautical rope in white that I got from the Dollar Tree and I cut off a little piece and then I hot glued them to either sides of the board. If you haven't figured it out, we're making a tray. Now, here's the one tip I would give you. Before gluing the first piece down, I would take that and measure out a second piece. I forgot to do that, so I kind of had to eyeball it, and one handle is a little bit bigger than the other handle. So take it from me and measure your second one out first. Now, originally when I started gluing this down, I was kind of looking at those frayed edges. I was like, uh-oh, what am I going to do with that? But then as I kept looking at it, I kind of liked it. So I went ahead and spread the little edges out and hot glued them down. I kind of feel like this made this look a little bit shabby chic, and I love that look too. Now, I did hold all the edges down for a little bit just to make sure that they were on. And you can use E6000 or that super glue too to permanently have it. But as you can see, it's very durable. After that was done, I flipped my boards over and I hot glued one of my blocks in each corner. Now, of course, you could do this before you do the handles. Mine just weren't dry yet, so I opted to do it after, and it turned out fine. But I just put a ton of hot glue on one block and put one block in each corner, and this completed this tray. I did take my Waverly Antique Wax and I touched up some of the edges and also rubbed it on the blocks because I wanted it all to blend in. After all my touch-ups were done, I was left with this shabby chic / rustic / springy tray, and I absolutely love how this came out. This actually could be great for Valentine's Day too, once you think about it, but how cute is this? And it was so easy to make as well. I can't wait to style it in my spring decor. What do you think? Now for my next DIY, it didn't come out exactly how I wanted, but I still think it came out cute. And this was inspired by something that I saw on Pinterest, which I believe originally came from the Wayfair website. So I started off with this amazing mason jar sign that, of course, I got from Dollar General, and I took some Waverly chalk paint in white and gave it a few coats of that on the top. Now I was careful not to get any paint on the metal on top. Then after my white paint was dry, I went ahead and took that Waverly antique wax and I brushed that over my white paint. Now I obviously was not going for full coverage here, but I wanted the majority of it to be covered. Then I went ahead and made sure that it was dry. Next, I took some of this petroleum jelly and I spread it all over my mason jar. I made sure to get every corner and also made sure that this was completely covered as well. Then I took that Waverly chalk paint in white again and I brushed it over the petroleum jelly. Then by using my hairdryer, I dried my mason jar, and then it was time for the magic. I took this little scraper and I scraped it down, and I did wipe off the petroleum jelly and paint after every scrape, but look at this. It created this chipped wood look, and I am obsessed with this look. It is so rustic and so neat, and how easy was that to do? Then I kind of decided that it took a little bit too much of the white off, so I just brushed a little bit back on there, and it was perfect. I loved it. And that credit goes to Windy City Crafts. That's where I got that idea, so thank you for that. Next, by using black acrylic paint and a really small brush, I just went around the perimeter of my mason jar. I started from the top, went down and around, and back up to the other end of the top. Then I went around the edges of the mason jar as well. Next, I took the sheet of rub-on transfers that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I started cutting out these little leafy decals. And I kind of was just playing with this. I wanted to build up a very pretty leafy display, I guess, on one side of my mason jar. But first, before I put anything down, I decided that the black around was just a little too bold, so I hit it with my sanding block. Then I went ahead and went back to those rub-on transfers, and I just, like I said, played with it until I got the look I was going for. After I pretty much knew how I was going to lay them all out, I went ahead and peeled off the back of my decals, and then I cut more out to kind of build it up. Then by using a craft stick, I rubbed them on. Fun fact, this was a fail. It did not work. For some reason, my rub-on transfers did not like the paint underneath. So I went ahead and put some Mod Podge on my paint because I thought that maybe the rub-on transfers would adhere to those. Fun fact again, that didn't work either. So I had 2 fails. And I think it was because my Mod Podge was not completely dry. So if you do this, it would work, but you need to Mod Podge over all the paint on your mason jar, let it sit for like an hour, and then do the rub-on transfers. And then I think it would work out a lot better. So here's where I'm like, oh no, now what do I do? So what I ended up doing was I took my decals off and cut them down as close to the leaf part as possible, and then I just went ahead and put them back on. Now, you can't really see the little transfer paper on there from far away, and really not when you're up close either, so this actually ended up working out. Once I had my vines down how I liked it, I took that Pink Parfait Apple Barrel paint again and then mixed it with some white Waverly chalk paint to make that pale pink. Now, I will tell you, skip this step too, because the pale pink did not show up. This project just had a lot of roadblocks in it, but in the end, I think it turned out okay. So then I took the back of a paintbrush and I just put dots all around, and see how they're coming out white? That really is pale pink, you just can't tell. So then I decided just to use the regular Pink Parfait paint and go over it. And now I kind of made like a little rose bush here, I guess. I don't really know. I don't really know what I was going for. I just wanted a really cute spring plant or vine. After I had my plant how I liked it, I went ahead and dried it with my blow dryer and then put a nice thin coat of Mod Podge over the whole mason jar to protect my paint. Next, I took this pack of chalkboard tags that I got from the Dollar Tree, and this one that it came in was just a little too big, so I decided just to cut it down a little bit. So I angled at the top and then cut it down and made it a little bit smaller. Next, I took some twine and I wrapped the top of my mason jar, but at the bottom of where the lid would be with that. Then I cut it off in the front and I tied a knot to the side of my lid. Next, I took my white paint marker and I outlined the perimeter of my tag. Then I wrote the word bloom in cursive writing, little fancy, right in the middle. Next, I took my twine and threaded it through the hole in my tag, and I tied a knot going down. That way it hung to the side of my mason jar right by the vines. Then originally I had tied a bow, decided I didn't like it because I wanted my little tag to be a little lower on my mason jar. So I pulled the tag down where I wanted it and I ended up hot gluing it down. That way it wouldn't move and then I can just work with the twine after. So after I untied my bow, I just took those ends and wrapped them around the back and hot glued them down. Then I did end up making a little twine bow again and hot glued it to the side where all the twine met in the front. Now, even though this project gave me a lot of challenges along the way, I think it still came out pretty cool. And it's very unique, and I absolutely love that chipped wood look and that technique, and I think I'm going to use it a lot because it's just one of my favorite looks. But what do you think? For the first DIY, I'm starting off with 2 of these packs of painter sticks. Now these come in 3 packs, so this will make 6 altogether. And I buy these packs from Lowe's, but I know that Walmart and I probably Home Depot have them too. So the first thing I did was go ahead and cut off the plastic on the sticks, and then I arranged them like a picket fence. So at first I did the just one straight line, and then I decided to stagger it just a little bit. So I did one shorter, one higher, one shorter, one higher, just like that. And then I flipped them all over so the ruler part was showing on the front. And then I'm going to take these jumbo popsicle sticks and I'm going to hot glue them down to the painter sticks. That way they all are glued together. Now, one craft stick was not long enough to cover all 6 of my painter sticks, so I took that 4th craft stick and I cut it into thirds, and then I went ahead and just hot glued the parts that did not reach. After all my painter sticks were glued all together, I flipped it over and gave it a somewhat messy coat of Waverly chalk paint in white. Now, I'm not going for full coverage here. I do want some of the natural wood to show through, so I just kind of lightly brushed over it. Now, I want the majority of it to be white, but like I said, if some of the wood showed through, that's totally fine. I also made sure to paint in between on those craft sticks as well. Once my white paint was dry, I took my Waverly Antique Wax and my favorite distressing brush that I do get in a 6-pack at the Dollar Tree, and I just dry brushed some of the wax on top of my little fence. I just really wanted it to look kind of beat up and rustic, so I just lightly brushed over it. Now, I did pay attention to the edges because I wanted to make those defined. Then after I was done distressing it, I took my sand block that I also got from the Dollar Tree and gave it a light sand just to blend in all my wax and the paint. Once that was done, I put that off to the side and grabbed these 3 metal flowers. Now these ones are on the stem, and these were the only ones I could find on a stem. All the rest of them are going to be stemless. But the first thing I did was take some purple paint, and it is not Apple Barrel, it is actually from a craft store that is out of business, but any purple paint will do. And then I just painted this orange flower with 3 coats of that. Now you do not have to use purple. This first project is going to be very colorful and whimsical, but you can paint these whatever colors you want. Like I said in the beginning, the possibilities with these are endless, so you choose what you like. Then for the second flower, I went ahead and took my pink parfait paint from Apple Barrel and gave the second flower 3 coats of that. Then for my third flower, I took a light blue paint from, I believe it was Apple Barrel, but I did not realize this was a gloss paint. You're gonna see it's a little shiny, but that's okay. I didn't notice it until the very end, but it still looked really great. So now I have a kind of lavender color, a light pink color, and a light blue color. After all of those were painted, I took a darker color of each one of those colors. So I took a dark blue and a makeup sponge, and I just lightly brushed over my light blue flower. And this is just to add some dimension and to define all the ridges that are in the metal flower. Then I did the same thing with the other 2. So I took a darker purple and I dry brushed over the light purple flower, and then I took like a hot pink fuchsia color and I dry brushed over the light pink flower. And I really loved the little touch that it gave. Now, after I was done putting the darker colors on each of the flowers, I went back with the original lighter colors and kind of just brushed over it to kind of lighten up the darker color a little bit. And that way it all blended in. Next, I took my Apple Barrel Spring Green paint and I lightly brushed over all of the leaves on the stems and the stem itself. I just wanted to kind of dull down the shininess and the kind of brighten up the darker colors of the leaves, so I just dry brushed over those. Then once all of my leaves were dry, I took a darker green and I dry brushed over the leaves just like I did with the petals of the flowers. Next, I found 3 buttons from that container of buttons from the Dollar Tree. And like I said, this one is going to be super colorful, but you can do whatever colors you want. But I found 3 different color buttons, and then I hot glued them down to the middle of each one of the flowers. Next, I felt like if they just needed something, so I took that white brush that I had painted the fence with, and I didn't even dip it in any other paint. I just used whatever paint was on the brush, and I just lightly dry brushed over all of the flowers, and I dry brushed over the leaves. I also made sure to dry brush over the buttons too, just to give that a little character as well. Next, I grabbed my picket fence again, and I arranged my little flowers how I liked them. Then, because they were longer than the actual fence, I took some metal wire cutters and I cut the back or the bottom of the stems off. Then, to give it a stronger hold, I took a craft stick and cut it in half, and then I hot glued a craft stick down on the back of each flower. You're going to see me do this throughout this whole video because that's the best way to glue these down, because there is an indent. It kind of is a bowl in the middle of the flower. Then once I got all of the craft sticks on, I figured out where I wanted all of my flowers to go. I wanted the middle one to be a little higher and then the 2 on the sides to be a little lower. So once I figured that all out, I just went ahead and hot glued them all down. I love how this little picket fence flower project came out. I just love the colors on it. It is just so springy, or it can transition into summer. And I think this would also be a great gift to give. I just think it's so cheerful and fun. And you're going to catch throughout the video, I incorporated a bunch of different styles. So we have some rustic, we have some colorful like this, we have some farmhouse. But I absolutely love this one. But you let me know. What do you think? For my next project, I'm going to start off by using this board that I got at the Dollar Tree around Easter. You can use any of the longer boards. They will definitely work. But I started off by plucking off the little feet on the back, the eyes, the bow, and then I cut off the tag. After that, I flipped it around, and by using my ivory chalk paint from Waverly, I just dry brushed that over the back of this sign. I was not going for full coverage. It was okay if some of the sign showed through, but I just made sure to have the majority of it covered with the ivory paint. Once that was painted, I put that aside to let it dry. Then I grabbed 3 more of these metal flowers. Now I did make sure to grab 3 different color flowers. I went ahead and took the hooks off and the bells. That way they were ready to paint. Then I went ahead and I needed these to be curved up. If you notice, they are kind of curved down, but I needed the middle to be pushed down. So I'm kind of showing you the difference between the two. I don't know if you could really tell, but I just started off by just pushing all of the petals up. So then I took that same brush that I used to paint my board that had the ivory chalk paint on it, and I just lightly brushed over all 3 of these flowers. Now I still wanted the original colors on these flowers to come through, so that's why I'm just lightly brushing over each one of them. This project is going to have a little bit more color in it, but it's going to be really rustic. Well, here's how all the flowers came out after I put that light ivory on it. And next I'm going to take my Waverly Antique Wax and my favorite distressing brush again, and I'm going to lightly brush over the petals with the Waverly Antique Wax. And again, this is to add that antique-y rustic look. Then again, to blend it all in, I took that ivory brush and just lightly brushed over the antique wax. I did this on all 3 of those flowers. After that, I grabbed my sign and I took my ruler, and I purposely bought this ruler because I feel like it would be the width of shiplap, but I put it in the middle of my board, and by using a pencil, I traced down either side of my ruler. Then after that, I took my finger and just kind of smudged the lines to make it all blend in, and again, giving it that shiplap look. Next, I took that distressing brush and that Waverly Antique Wax, and I just brushed over my sign, giving it that rustic look. Then to blend it all in, I lightly sanded over it. Next, I took these 3 frames that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I went ahead and took them apart. So I took the stand off of the back, and then I used my little scraper tool to pry off the little hook that the stand was on, and then I used a knife, but you might want to get a screwdriver and unscrew the little clip on the front, and I did this to all 3. So I took off the stand on the back and the clip off the front. Once my frames were ready, I put them on my board and I just lined them up to see how I would like it. Now I made sure, you can't really tell, but I did make sure to leave room at the top and the bottom of the sign as well. And then I placed my little flowers on each of the frames. I kind of noticed that the frames just needed something. So what I ended up doing was taking my antique Waverly wax and just dry brushing over the frames, and this kind of darkened it up a little bit and made the frames pop from the board itself. And I really do think that this little touch added so much. Look at the difference between the two. I really loved that. So I did that on all 3 frames. So I finally decided what I wanted to do to the middle of my flowers. The whole time I was just racking my brain, but I think this really added so much. So I took some twine and some hot glue, and by starting in the middle of the flower, I hope that made sense, I just wrapped it around and around. So I just started spinning it around itself and just adding hot glue here and there. And like I said, I think that this added so much, and it really made the flowers pop too. So, and it added to that rustic look. But I went ahead and I also did this on all 3 of the flowers. Once I was done adding twine to all 3 of the flowers, I took that Waverly Antique Wax and just kind of dabbed it on the twine just to blend it all together and make it all cohesive. Then I took that board again and I hot glued the frames down on my board, and then I needed to hot glue the flowers on the frames. And to do this, I did that craft stick method where I cut off a little piece of the craft stick, hot glued it to the back of the flower, and then I hot glued the craft stick down on the frame. Then to complete this project, I flipped my board over and hot glued some twine around the top of the board and then the bottom of the board as well. I made sure to make the twine kind of just layer each other, kind of just be messy about it, but I think that that really completed this project. I love how this came out. Like I said, it is cute, it's colorful, and it's rustic, but it probably is one of my top ones in this whole video. I absolutely love this. Now you can put a hanger on it if you decide to hang it, or you can just stand it. And the great thing about this is you could even hang it or display it long ways too. So you can either go up and down or side to side. It's totally up to you. But what do you think? To bring you this very neat DIY that was actually inspired by one of my favorite YouTubers, Kaylin Cash. I can go ahead and link the video down in the description box below for you to check out, but she set up a flower bar in her foyer and I absolutely fell in love with it. Now the crate that she got was actually from Hobby Lobby, but when I saw it, I knew that I could create it by using Dollar Tree supplies. So I decided just to make a whole DIY project out of it with a bunch of little DIYs to put with it. So I hope that you enjoy this just as much as I did. So to begin, we are going to start by making the crate. So what you're going to need are 9 of these little crates from the Dollar Tree. And the first thing I did was set them up so it was 3 by 3. Then by taking the wood glue that I actually got from the Dollar Tree, it's the first time I ever tried it, and I gotta say, I'm pretty impressed. It's holding up pretty well. But I did a combination of that wood glue and hot glue to glue them all together. Now, of course, because these are from the Dollar Tree, they're not going to fit perfectly because they are not cut perfectly. But that's okay, it just added to the little rustic touch. Then, to hold all of my crates together while the glue set, I took these little clamps that I got from the Dollar Tree and put them in between each of the crates. I gotta say, these are pretty cool for only being $1. They're small, but they are very strong and tight, so they're definitely holding all these crates together while the glue sets. After all the glue dried, I went ahead and removed the clamps, and then it was time to stain the entire thing. So to do this, I took a baby wipe and just dipped it in my Waverly Antique Wax and just rubbed it over the entire crate. Now, I will show you that I actually jumped to a different method to paint the inside, because of course it was hard to get in all the little corners and edges on the insides of the crates with the baby wipe. So in a minute I'll show you what I did, but I just made sure to basically stain this entire thing. Now of course you can use wood stain if you like. I just really love the color of Waverly Antique Wax, so I just stuck with that. Alright, so to do the insides, I took a foam brush and I dipped it in some water, and then I dipped it in the antique wax, and then that's how I stain the insides. Now you don't want to forget to get the little holes there too, and that way the entire thing is stained. Now this did take a little bit of time, but it was of course super easy, and it definitely pays off in the end. So after it was stained, I just went over it just a little bit with the baby wipe just to kind of wipe down any of the darker part, and then I took a sand block that I got from the Dollar Tree and just sanded over the entire thing to kind of rough it up, but also bring out that natural wood that's underneath. Now when I started sanding the insides of the crates, you'll see I'm actually sanding against the grain. And then I actually moved to a brand new sand block, and that way it's rougher and it really roughs up the insides. But the reason why I sanded the inside of the crate against the grain is because you can see these sand lines, and I really liked it because it looked like it was aged and this was really old, which is exactly the look I was going for. So now that our crate was complete, it was time to move on to make some accessories to go in it. Now, unlike my other videos, I'm going to save all of the DIYs for the final reveal at the end. So hang with me if you want to see how this all turned out. So I put my crate off to the side and picked up this little plastic toy water can. Now this did not come from the Dollar Tree. It actually came with something that my daughter got, but she didn't really use it, so I took it. So of course once I took it, then she wanted it, but that's okay, I'll just get her another one. Anyway, I do know that the Dollar Tree does sell these, just mine did not have them out yet, but keep your eyes open for when they get put out. So I went ahead and heated up the sticker on the front, and then I scraped it off and then just sanded it. Now there is a lot of glue residue and paper left over, but to be honest, you can't even tell once this is completed. So next I took my Waverly Elephant Gray paint and I mixed it with a little bit of white chalk paint just to bring the gray a little lighter, because I noticed that when I galvanized things and used this paint, it was a little darker than I liked. So I decided for this to brighten it up by adding some white paint, and it worked out perfectly. Then I just gave this entire watering can 2 coats of that mixture. Now, I have galvanized things on my channel so many times, so you've probably seen me do this 1,000 times, but it is just one of my favorite things to do, and I loved the way that this came out. Now, when you're painting this, you do want to make sure to get the underneath part of the handle that's orange, because in the next little clip, you'll see that I missed it and a little bit of the orange came through. Now, at the end, I did off camera go ahead and fix that, but just make sure to paint as much as you can on the inside too. So once my watering can was dry, I took a piece of paper towel and I put a little bit of white Waverly chalk paint on it. Then I took some black acrylic paint and poured some on, and then I took that mixture that I had made and added it to my paints. Then I'm actually going to add a metallic paint as well. But the first thing I did to give this the galvanized look was I took a little piece of a kitchen sponge and I just dipped it into the white paint dabbed it off on my paper towel so it wasn't so heavy, and then just dabbed it all over my watering can. Now, like I said, you've probably seen me do this many times before. It's really nothing new, but every single time I do this, I just fall in love with this kind of texture and look even more. So you just want to dab it over the entire watering can, and some parts are a little darker or heavier white, some parts are a little lighter. And then once you have all your white paint on, you're going to move to the black. So you're just going to do the same thing. You dip it in black paint, you kind of dab it off on your paper towel, and then you dab it all over your watering can. Now, you can go back and forth between the white and the black, and that's what I do. That way all the colors seem to mix together. Then once you get the black and the white on, I moved to that gray mixture, and this just dulls down the black and the white so it's not so bold. So I just put that gray black paint all over the watering can by doing the same thing. Then I moved to a metallic silver paint that I picked up from Walmart, and I dabbed that all over the watering can too to kind of give it a little bit of a shinier look. Now, I didn't want it too shiny, and it really didn't make it shiny, very shiny at all. So the way that it came out was perfect. My mom could not believe that this was the little plastic watering can that I started out with before. So I cannot wait to show you the final reveal. But honestly, like I said, when you're in the Dollar Tree, keep your eyes open for these little plastic toys because you'll be able to make them into high-end looks so easily. Real quick, as I finish up this watering can, if you are new to my page, I just want to welcome you and say thank you so much for joining me. I have gained so many new subscribers in the last couple weeks, so I know that there might be a lot of new faces here, so I just want to say thank you. And if you're returning, thank you so much for returning to my channel and for subscribing. I truly appreciate all of your support. My channel has grown so much in the last month, and it is not because of me, it is because of you. So thank you so much for all of your support. I really look forward to sharing a ton more DIYs, home decor ideas, and party planning ideas with all of you in the future. So thank you so much. If you are loving what you're seeing today, please don't forget to give my video a thumbs up because it really helps my channel to grow. Once that part was complete, I took my Waverly Antique Wax and a makeup sponge, and I just kind of brushed it over any parts that I thought would naturally become rusty. And this, I feel, brought the whole thing together. This completed and totally gave me the look I was going for. So I made sure to dab it around the spout where the holes are, up around the handle, the edges, the top and the bottom, and then kind of underneath where the spout is too, because you figure if water got on there, it would be a little rusty. So, and then I just kind of blotted in between on the sides as well, and I totally think this completed the watering can. Don't forget, I'm going to have my final reveal at the end. After my watering can was finished, I went ahead and put that aside, and then I grabbed these two gardening tools that I got from the Dollar Tree. So the first thing I did was, of course, cut off the tags, and then I cut off the foam that's around the handle. This just was not going to fit into my look. Now, I am not a gardener. This is not actually to be used, obviously. This is just for display and decor purposes only. Okay, so I then took that baby wipe again and dipped it in some Waverly Antique Wax, and I stained the bottom of these tools because the light wood just was not going to go, so I needed to darken it up a little bit, but I did this for both. Then to add a little texture in the middle, I took some twine and simply hot glued it in between the top and the bottom of the handle. You can see that there's little grooves there, so that's where I started and that's where I ended. But I just made sure to keep it very tight so the entire middle of the handle was covered with twine. Now I didn't put hot glue around every single wrap around, if that makes sense, but I just kind of wrapped and wrapped and then put some hot glue and then wrapped and wrapped and wrapped and put more. So I just kind of tacked it down as I went, as I saw fit. But I did this on both tools as well. After my handles were wrapped, I just took my scissors and kind of trimmed up all of the little hairs that were sticking out. Now, I know a lot of people use lighters, but I get a little freaked out with fire. So I just opted for cutting it all off. Then I took that Waverly Antique wax and my makeup sponge again, and I just dabbed it all over the twine just to kind of give it that rustic look and to darken it up just a little bit. Now, for the tops of the tools, I'm going to show you two different ways that you can do this. And the reason why is because I did it one way and then I saw a different way that after I already did this, so I decided to change it. But here's number one. This is kind of the simpler look if you want to go with this look. So the only thing I did was paint the tops of the tools, the metal parts, with that gray elephant chalk paint from Waverly. So I just painted the entire top and then also that little silver ring that's right above the wood, the handle. And then after that, I added some Waverly Antique wax around the edges of the tops and then kind of in the middle just to add that antique rust look. Okay, so that was the first way to do it. So it was just the gray chalk paint and then some rust. Now, this is the one that I fell in love with and that I had to try. So this one is super easy too. So all you do is you take some Mod Podge and you rub it all over the top of the tool. You make sure that the surface is completely covered. After that's done, you're going to take some ground cinnamon, that's right, I said cinnamon, and you're going to sprinkle it all over the tool. Then you're going to take that Mod Podge again and simply paint over it. Now at first, it's just going to look like you're just pushing all the cinnamon around and it's not doing anything. But the more Mod Podge you add, the more it's going to start to create a paste. And that's when the magic happens. So as you can see there, it's starting to adhere and it's starting to kind of make it bumpy and kind of textured. Then all I did was sprinkle a little bit more cinnamon in random spots and then I dabbed the Mod Podge on top of it. And that seemed to bring out the very primitive, very rustic, very rusty, very antiqued, very old look I was going for. Just all the things. So after the front was done, I went ahead and flipped it over and did the exact same thing to the back. Then after my shovel was complete, I grabbed the other tool and did the exact same thing. I cannot wait to show you how these turned out at the end. So you definitely want to stay tuned. This is so amazing. And I want to thank the Silver Farmhouse on YouTube and Facebook for giving me this amazing idea. Now in this shot, the Mod Podge was still a little wet, but you can see what it's going to look like and how amazing does that look. Then, of course, to give it that final touch, I took that Waverly Antique Wax and just kind of rubbed it all over the edges of both of the tools and then around that little silver ring, and that brought it all together. I love these. Then I put those aside, and this next one really isn't a DIY, but I went ahead and did 3 of these because we're going to add them to the box. So I took the pack of the mini terracotta pots that came from the Dollar Tree, and these are the 3-pack, and I just simply dry brushed some ivory chalk paint all over the pots. And like I said, I did these 3 of them. Now I only showed you one because I did the other 2 off camera because it is that simple. Next, it was time to make a sign for our crate. So I grabbed this cute little framed sign that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I loved it because I really loved what the front looked like. So I started off by taking off the hanger, and then I took out the insert. Now, the wood around is not wood. It's like a plasticky type of material. I'm not even sure what it is. So I sanded it down thinking that that would help for the antique wax to adhere to it. It really didn't. I mean, if this was real wood, I would only have to go very lightly and give 1 coat, but you can see right there that it's kind of spreading and it's plastic or something. So what I did was use a baby wipe, dipped it in that antique wax, and then I gave it 2 coats, and I dried the first coat before applying the second coat. That way it just made it a little darker. Now it does look like wood. I mean, there is wood grain or fake wood grain coming through, so it did end up really great at the end, but I just went ahead and gave it 2 coats just for good measure. Now I really love this too because it ended up lighter than the actual crate itself, which I loved. After that was done, I took the insert and I had 2 goals here. First, I wanted to try to preserve that really cute home word. Second, I was trying not to rip the paper. Spoiler alert, I failed at both. So to make this a little easier, I just heated up the word with my hair dryer, and then I used my scraper tool to carefully try to get the word off. Now, the word did pull up some of the paper at the bottom, but I actually just kind of went with it, and like I said, this whole thing is going to be super rustic anyway, so it just kind of added to the rustic touch. Now, as I got closer, or in the middle of the word, boom, it broke. But at least it broke in 2 different pieces, and it's going to be super easy to hot glue back together if I ever go to use it, as I showed you right there. So to kind of fix the paper, I did go ahead and peel off a little bit around the edges, and then I sanded it down. Now, of course, you want to be careful because you don't want to rip up a lot more of the paper, but I just did the best I could. And then, of course, to give it that rustic look, I took my Waverly Antique Wax and I just brushed it all over the sign. That way it tied in with the rest of the project. Now for this, I used my favorite distressing brush and I just dry brushed right over it. Then I did pay attention to the edges too. To add my wording to my sign, I used this stencil that I also picked up from the Dollar Tree. Now we're going to be spelling out Flower Market. So I used my ruler just to figure out where the center was, and then there are 6 letters in both, so the O and the W are going to split center up top in the word flower, and then market, the R and the K are going to split center in that word. Now, as much as I measured this, it still did not come out perfectly even on the top and the bottom, but it's okay. Again, it just adds to that rustic look. So I just kept it. I might add something to either side of the words to kind of make it all go together, but honestly, I really love how it all came out, so it's okay by me. So I did, as you can see, I am drying in between because I did notice that the stencil, the paint on the stencil was getting onto the sign and I really wanted to preserve the sign. So I just went ahead and stenciled all of my letters on. Now it did kind of come out messy and I'm going to fix that in a minute, but I was kind of disappointed. I have used these before and it's never done that. So I don't know if it was because the paper was kind of glossy underneath or what, or it could have been user error. It very well could have been, but I do go ahead and fix it. Now, of course, if you have a Cricut or a vinyl cutter or something like that, you could use that to do this step. So after all my letters were on and they were dry, I dry brushed some white Waverly chalk paint over my letters just to kind of distress them, and then I did that with the Waverly Antique Wax as well. So then this is where I decide, and they're a little bit too messy, so I'm going to go ahead and clean it up. So I simply just took my black paint marker from Walmart and I just outlined each of the letters, and this really helped to clean it all up. Then, because it kind of took away some of the white distressing and the brown distressing, I just went ahead and distressed over it again. How many times can I say distressing or distressed in this video? After that, I popped my sign back into the frame and then just kind of made some touch-ups to distress it even more. I did decide to add a little bit more white to the letters, but then I also went around the frame as well to kind of lighten it up. And again, I wanted there to be a difference of color between this sign and the crate itself. The crate is very dark, so I loved how this was a little lighter. It was a great contrast. Now, to attach this sign to the crate, I took 2 of the longer dowel rods that I got from Walmart and I simply hot glued one on either side of the sign. Then after that glue set, I just took my baby wipe and antique Waverly wax and I stained my dowel rods. I really do love how the front of this sign came out, and that's why I really wanted to preserve that paper underneath, because I think those pink little flowers are the perfect little pop of color that this needed. After my dowels were all dry, I took my crate and I figured out the middle of the crate and where to hot glue the sign on. Then by adding a generous amount of hot glue, I just simply glued them on. Now I did end up adding something underneath the sign to hold it up while the glue set, because it was kind of hard to hold the sign up and then push the dowel rods down because I don't have 3 hands. I only have 2. But once they pretty much set, I did go ahead and add some duct tape to the back just to give it that extra support. Now, of course, it's bright blue duct tape, but this is going up against a wall anyway, so it didn't really bother me. But I have not had a problem with it falling off or anything, so the duct tape definitely helped. So after my sign was on my crate, it was time to put it all together. So now it's time for the final reveal. What do you think? I cannot express to you how excited I was to share this with you. I just absolutely loved how this came out, and there is so much to look at. There's so much going on here, and a lot of texture that I just think adds to this display so well. Now, as you can see, I did go ahead and add some flowers that I got from the Dollar Tree. I just added a bunch of different greenery and some picks and mixed them all together. I added the pots that we had painted, and then how cool do those tools look? I wish that you could see them in person because the camera does not do them justice, and to feel them is really neat as well. But look at that. I mean, how neat is that texture? I also decided to add a pair of gardening gloves just to add to the vibe of gardening. So you're going to have to let me know in the comments what you think about this entire display. I decided to put it in my mom's foyer. Yes, I am still living here. I decided to put it in her foyer, and she really loves it. I paired it up with some watering cans that I got from Ray Dunn, and it came out so cute. I will actually have a picture of that in just a little bit. Another amazing idea that I thought of after doing this was I cannot wait to switch this out for every season. Now, because that picture up top, the frame, it just pops off, I can make an insert that says pumpkin patch, sunflower patch, fresh eggs maybe for Easter, or carrot patch, and then I can just fill these crates with all of those things like pumpkins, carrots, eggs, sunflowers, and then think of something for Christmas. So I love how versatile this is going to be. This is an absolutely all year round piece, and I think it is such a statement and really says a lot. So let me know in the comments what you think. Again, I want to thank you so much for joining me today and watching me create this display. I hope that you got inspired and got some ideas to create your own. If you haven't done so already, please don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel, and then give this video a thumbs up if you loved what you saw today. It really helps my channel to grow. And until I see you again, I'll craft with you soon. Bye!